Let's face it, starting a new game is always hard. Starting a new game that everyone else has years of experience on you, even harder. So let's go over some tips for starting out in Splatoon 2. Hey everybody, it's Rose. One question I get asked a lot in my Twitch streams is, do you have any tips for new players in Splatoon? Splatoon 2 is Nintendo's fast-paced, adorable, and surprisingly competitive multiplayer 4v4 game. Sort of like their take on competitive shooters, though there's a lot more than shooting in this game, which we'll get into. I've been playing Splatoon since 2015 when the game first initially released on the Wii U, and I've been playing Splatoon 2 ever since it launched on the Switch in 2017. If you're an experienced player, keep in mind that these tips might be too introductory for you, as this is meant for brand new players who are overwhelmed upon starting. As a result, I won't be covering topics concerning ranked modes, salmon run, gear, or specific weapon comps and whatnot, though those might be things I get into in future videos. For this video, we're really just going to be focusing on Turf War, which is the standard mode that everybody starts with. So without further ado, let's get started. Tip number 1, concentrate on getting your ink on the ground. The winner of Turf War is determined by who has the most ink on the ground by the end of 3 minutes. If you're new, I recommend hanging back and inking spawn until you get a good feel for your weapon. If you're just starting out, you'll begin playing with the Splattershot Jr. before you're able to unlock other weapons. Inking turf also gives you points towards your special, which we'll get into in more detail later. Plus, enemies will move slowly in your ink, and you can swim in your own ink while in your squid form, so it's great for area control too. There's no real downside to covering the ground. Tip number 2, concentrate on staying alive. This is really hard when you're a new player surrounded by people over level 100, so don't feel bad about avoiding team fights as you're still dipping your toes into the ink. Anytime you're not alive means that's time you aren't able to ink turf, and we know that's vital to the objective. Tip number 3, find your playstyle. Putting aside high-level play meta, there's no bad weapon except for a weapon you find yourself struggling with. Each weapon type has its strengths, and each of those types has many variants. If you end up wanting a specific breakdown of roles and advantages and disadvantages for each weapon, I recommend checking out Wadsome here on YouTube. I'll link the specific video I'm talking about in the description below. But if you're just starting out, that will probably be more overwhelming than helpful. So here are some basics. Shooters. The Splattershot Jr. you start out with is a shooter. These are rapid-fire weapons, some more so than others, and have a short to mid-range of fire. These are good for starting out if you have some experience with third-person shooters. Dualies. My main. Similar to the shooters, these are rapid-fire, but you'll have 2 reticles instead of 1, as you have 2 guns that fire together. The coolest thing about dualies is that you can roll with them. Rolling gives you extra maneuverability, which is super helpful. Blasters. These are another shooting weapon, but they often have a shorter range than the standard shooters and a slower rate of fire, but they're powerful. Well-placed shots can often spot opponents in 1 or 2 hits. Rollers. If you don't like shooting, I recommend starting out with a roller when you unlock the Splat Roller. They're great for ink coverage as you leave a wide line of ink behind you as you roll over the ground. And you can even roll over unsuspecting opponents. These also have the ability to flick ink at farther opponents. Chargers. Do you like to snipe? Try out a charger. These are long-range weapons that you charge up a shot for. Some have scopes too. Find good places away from the front lines to snipe players, but you'll tend to ink less turf with them, so that's important to keep in mind. Sloshers. The trusty paint bucket. Sloshers can range a lot from one variant to the next, as some have a very short range that you can fling often, and others have a longer range that you fling less frequently. With the slosher, you throw ink at enemies in an arc. They're great for hitting enemies in hard-to-reach spots, like over walls. Brushes. The brush weapons are a subclass of rollers. Like rollers, they leave a line of ink, but it's thinner. There are ink brushes, which are very fast, but lack power and leave a very thin trail of ink. And then there are octo brushes, which are stronger but slower and have an ink line width between ink brushes and rollers. Splatlings. If you want range with a powerful weapon that fires a furious spray of ink, look to the Splatlings. They're mid to long range and you charge them like a charger, but you have a very high rate of fire. Think of a minigun. Brellas. Brellas are an interesting weapon because you essentially get a shield in the form of an opened umbrella. It shoots ink like a shooter, though it takes several shots to splat someone and it doesn't have a super high rate of fire. You can also hold down ZR to send the Brella off in front of you, which not only acts as a little mobile shield, but it also inks the ground. Tip number 4. Learn your sub ability and special. These come assigned with your weapon, so this is also something to factor in when choosing a weapon you like. Sub-abilities are often bombs, and each one has unique advantages, whether you want to surprise the enemy with a splat bomb, stick a suction bomb on a corner, or do a quick 1-2 combo with a burst bomb on your main weapon. There are even things like torpedo bombs, which track the enemy and give you an idea where they are, and fizzy bombs, which you can shake before releasing to have them bounce across the map and explode a few times. Maybe lay down some mines and surprise the enemy. There are also supportive sub-abilities like squid beacons, which act as items your teammates can safely jump to from spawn or anywhere on the map, and point sensors, which reveal the locations of enemies to everyone on your team. The splash wall is a defensive sub-ability, great for holding choke points and protecting yourself. There are many sub-abilities, and I haven't touched on all of them, and certainly not in very much detail, so I always recommend trying them out for yourself to figure out which ones you like the most. Specials are that thing we mentioned earlier, that you can charge when you ink turf. You also lose some of your special gauge when you die, which is why it's important to stay alive. Like with your sub ability, it's worth trying out some different specials. When you first start, your Splattershot Jr. will come with ink armor, which gives you and your teammates a shield that protects them from any damage for one hit, which can make it great for pushing forward. The other special that I would recommend all new players to be aware of is the Tenta missiles. When they're fired at you, ink missiles will track your location and then fire from down above, but you have a few seconds to move before 1. They fire down from the sky, and 2. Hit you. Not only do you not want to get splatted, of course, but if you can minimize the amount of turf they're spread across, you'll minimize the amount of points the enemy gets. Here's how I do it. As the missiles have locked on and launched, I wait a few seconds, and then shortly before they hit the ground, I swim to safety in my own color ink, and the missiles largely hit one spot together instead of being spread out. This is also easier to do if you have dualies with the rolling ability, but if you time it right, you can do this with any weapon, assuming you have your own color ink around you. Tip number 5. Learn the map. Map sense is something that takes time, so pace yourself, because there are a ton of maps. The maps rotate every 2 hours. Some maps favor certain weapons or force you to play a certain way. Certain maps are harder for swimming around, as you have to be more aware of the grates, or some maps have areas that you can jump off of and die. There are maps that have a lot of great spots to perch on as a charger or a splatling player. There are areas you can climb by inking walls and swimming up them. It is very helpful for getting around, so ink walls when you can. If you're blocked off from one area on a map, see if you can find another way around. There's usually a different path you can take. And if you're pushed back into your spawn, if you're a high-speed player, particularly a dualies player so you can roll around, or you've got an ink brush, try to break away so you can force the enemy to follow you and spread out, which will help your teammates move forward. After all, this isn't a single-player game, unless you play the single-player campaign, but we're not talking about that today. Map sense is a skill valuable at all stages of play. Whenever you have a safe moment, pull up the map with X and check what the state of things are. Tip number 6. Be careful with your jumps to teammates. Segueing into this point, you should study the map closely when you're about to jump to a teammate. When you jump to them, everyone nearby will be able to see exactly where you're going to land before you hit the ground. And unless you're a dualies player, or have a specific gear ability, you won't be able to roll out of the way immediately. So Rose, when is it ever safe to jump? My advice is to almost always jump to your back lane. If you have a long-range player set up far away, or you have a teammate who isn't near the action, jump to them and then swim to where you need to be for your weapon and your playstyle. Or else, feel the wrath of the enemy teammates spotting your jump. We mentioned squid beacons earlier in tip number 4. It's important to note that when you jump to a squid beacon, your jump will not be advertised to the enemies around you. So that's also super helpful, so take advantage of your teammates' squid beacons. And as a bonus tip, always booyah back. But no, seriously, if you saw a teammate do something awesome, press down on your D-pad to give them a dose of serotonin. I like to start out my matches with a booyah just for fun. This isn't even touching the many other aspects of Splatoon, such as gear, ranked modes, salmon run, and far, far more. You might see future videos from me concerning those topics, or even highly specific topics about my preferences of dualies, or maybe the freshest looking clothes. Splatoon 2 is one of my favorite games, and it's one I really enjoy streaming. So if you enjoyed this video or have additional questions, pop by my streams. I do a mix of ranked games and playing games with viewers of all skill levels, and we all have a great time together. And at the end of the day, I just want more people to play Splatoon. That's it from me, everybody, and remember, don't get cooked, stay off the hook.